thank you for joining us on this webinar that talks about using our APIs and integrating FileCatalyst into either your own platform, web application, desktop application using our APIs. Before we jump into the APIs and a demo of some of these APIs, we'll cover a bit about the products we offer. So as you guys are probably all aware, we have 3 different products: FileCatalyst Direct, Workflow Central. I'll just go over over the products in brief, just to provide context to some of the APIs we'll be looking at shortly. So our main flagship product is our FileCatalyst Direct product. So this is our point-to-point file transfer application. It's architected as a server client model. The server sits in a central location and can attach to any storage, whether it's local storage, a SAN, a NAS, or we even support object storage. There are various different object storage that we support. And on the client side, we have a number of different client applications, all the way from the hot folder, which is our automated client. The idea is that you install it, you configure it, it runs as a service. You define which servers you want to connect to. You define what folders you want to monitor, either locally or remote, as well as you define a schedule and tasks that identify how you wish a transfer to happen. Our desktop clients are, I guess, similar to any FTP-like interface that allows you to perform ad hoc transfers through your browser. The idea is that you have local files, remote files. You can either upload files or download files, all in an ad hoc fashion. We have our browser technologies. That's our transfer agent that allows you to perform accelerated file transfers from within any browser. We have our mobile apps for Android and iOS, and again, we have APIs available for the mobile platforms. And then we have our SDK, which we'll be looking at today. The next product is our FileCatalyst Workflow. So FileCatalyst Workflow is a web-based application that allows you to perform a number of different events and tasks. The core features are being able to ingest content into a central location with metadata. So the idea is that you expose a form, the user logs in, specifies what metadata they want to enter, based on the form you have exposed. We capture all that metadata and generate a sidecar XML, JSON file, PDF file, and submit that along with the various files that the user is uploading. In the same sense, a user can also send files to anyone with an email address. All they do is specify an email and the files they wish to send. That person, the recipient, will receive a link in their email. They click on the link and they can download the files. The third sort of feature of workflow that's commonly used is a simulation of share folders. So the idea is that if you have content that you want to share with other users, but allow them to sort of access that content anytime they want, you build a share folder up on your workflow deployment. You upload files, and then you can basically, as part of the group, anyone in that group can access that content. The same applies for personal storage folders. If you have content that you're continuously working on, or it needs to share in a sales team, either collateral or for marketing team, opposed to keep uploading that content over and over again and sending it to people, you can put it on your share folder, and at any point in time, you can select that file and send it to anyone with an email address. Again, so this avoids you to having to re-upload that file over and over again. The third product is FileCatalyst Central, which is our web-based management and monitoring application. It provides you sort of a bird's eye view of your entire deployment. You can see all the nodes that are connected in. Transfers happening in real time. You get notifications for various events that you subscribe to. We have extensive reporting based on how much data is being transferred, how much bandwidth is being used. And some of the key features that Central exposes, and the things we'll be looking at today is remote node administration, so being able to remotely control a node, as well as manage a node, modify various settings, as well as the API that the REST API that comes with Central, and some of the features being exposed by this REST API. Cool. So the FileCatalyst SDK, what we've built here is a bit of the table that sort of walks you through the different products as well as the API available. This table is available to you on our website. So again, filecatalyst.com solutions/FileCatalyst development. So it's the SDK page under products. But for each product, we identify what APIs are available and some of the uses, the use case of the usage that can be used, for these APIs. So the FileCatalyst server, we have a Java API, a CLI, as well as a REST API. And again, you can use this to integrate any of the administrative functionality within your own application, such as creating one-time accounts or accounts on the fly for users to submit files into and then delete those accounts. The FileCatalyst hot folder, it has a full REST API. And again, you can control pretty much any feature, any aspect of that hot folder using REST. The transfer agent has, it's a REST API, that's been exposed. We've also built a JavaScript wrapper around the REST API to make it easy for you to perform various events, through JavaScript versus, writing your own REST calls, within JavaScript if you want to integrate the whole concept of web-based transfer within your own web application. FileCatalyst Mobile, we have, it's available Android and iOS, so we have APIs available in both these languages. Also, we have our C++ client library that can be compiled for different platforms. So if you're looking at working with other platforms, we can then compile the C++, client API, for that specific platform. In terms of the FileCatalyst client APIs, so these are our native APIs. We have a Java native API, a C++ native API. We have a CLI tool. And we have a .NET wrapper that wraps around our CLI, so it allows you to perform transfer within any .NET environment. From FileCatalyst workflow standpoint, we have job submission. We have a Java API that allows you to submit jobs, through Java. From an administration standpoint, we have a REST API that allows you to create users, fields, forms, FTP sites, and so on. FileCatalyst Central, we have a full REST API that again allows you to manage the entire deployment via REST. So you can either see what's happening on your central deployment, or you can drill down into specific nodes based on the node ID, and either see what's going on with that node, change settings, execute tasks, and so on and so forth. The third product, which somehow ended up at the bottom of the slide, is our transfer controller. So the FileCatalyst transfer controller is an application we developed that sits on top of FileCatalyst Central, and the idea of this is to facilitate node-to-node transfers. So if you're looking to send files from one location to another location, opposed to performing an upload, waiting for the upload to complete, and then doing a download, the transfer controller allows you to move files from between these two locations sort of as a one step. So you make a call to the transfer controller, say, hey, move this file from this location to location A to location B, and the transfer controller will establish the connection to the server, perform the upload to the server, and establish a connection with the with location B, and download the files from the server to location B. So it kind of takes care of all of that for you. Great. So now let's jump into some examples. So I have a whole bunch of points on this, on the slide, and the reason I put that, I guess I went in detail here, is because this PowerPoint will be available on our website, and I want to sort of explain as much as I can on this slide, but also walk through some of the stuff. So you don't have to read through everything, because I will be showing you pretty much everything in terms of these bullets, and we'll be walking through an example of how to perform this stuff. So when working with REST, you can use any REST client. So if you want to use, curl, wget. I really like Postman. It's really easy to use, simple. You don't have to worry about, working with command line. They have a nice little, interface. So my recommendation is Postman when, looking to play with some of our REST APIs, etc. Postman is great when, to sort of get familiar with some of the responses coming back, some of the requests you're making, and then you can look at integrating these REST calls into your own application. So then now you're aware of, what type of response you should expect, etc. One of the biggest things is identifying which product you're going to be working with based on what you're looking to do. As I mentioned, that each product has a REST API, but also some of these products like the server, hot folder, transfer agent can be connected to Central. So you can either make calls directly to the product through the HTTP the port that's exposed in the product, or proxy these calls through Central. Both are viable options. The only thing is that when you're making calls directly to the product, you need to make sure that those ports are open on the public, and and the ports are open and accessible to the public if you're making calls from outside that location. Or if it's all connected to Central, you don't have to worry about opening up the ports on the individual nodes. You can proxy these calls to Central. So every single call is going to go to Central, and Central will then identify which node to connect to, etc. If you're making calls directly to the product, you have to make sure the remote administration is enabled on both the server or the hot folder, um, because the authentication and how you identify yourself to those nodes is through the remote admin username and password. Each REST call needs a REST authorization header, and this is computed by running a base64 encoding on the username :password to obtain the REST authorization header. When making the calls, you have to specify your accept header to identify that you're going to be working with XML or JSON. I really like JSON. I find it a lot easier to use, but if you're an XML fan, by all means, we support both. And if you're making for get, delete, and so on, you need to specify the accept header. But when you're making post calls, so basically you're sending data to to any of our products, you have to make sure you set the content type. This is really important, otherwise your call will not work. So the content type has to be set again to either JSON or XML. In this slide, I specify JSON explicitly because it's more of a language I prefer working with. We have extensive documentation on the different endpoints, as well as what those endpoints accept in terms of query parameters, as well as the body of the post that you'll be that you'll be sending across. So again, I'll show you the documentation is for some of these products. So by all means, you make sure you read the documentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We can help you understand what you're looking to do, as well as provide guidance on how you can achieve it with some of the REST APIs that we have available. If you are working with our REST APIs and you're looking to integrate it within your own application, we provide a number of different libraries that allow you to convert the JSONs to actual objects in those different libraries, so in those different languages. So take a look at our documentation page. There's a number of resources, and again, we support Java, .NET, C, Ruby, etc., and so on. And one of the cool tools that we have sort of exposed as part of the products is our Swagger UI. Again, it's very similar to Postman, but opposed to downloading Postman, you can actually start making calls directly on on the node itself through the Swagger UI URL that's exposed as part of the documentation. So let's jump out of this presentation and let's start looking at some of the demos. So we'll run through a couple of demos. There's some things that I've sort of listed out here based on requests I've received over the past. If there's something specific you're looking to do and you need some assistance, you can by all means drop it in the questions tab. If it's easy enough for me to show it, I'll be happy to. If it's something complicated, we can definitely pick it up, at a different time and go through some of the stuff one-on-one. Okay, so let me just exit out of this. Just give it a second. There we go. The spinning beach ball of that had me worried for a second, but I'm glad it came out. So before we jump into any of this, let's look at some of the documentation. So the documentation is available within the product itself. And you know what, maybe better if I show you that. So I'll show you the FileCatalyst server, and then we can go from there. So under help, you have help contents. I'm on a Mac. Some of these menu options may be slightly different on Windows or on Linux, but on a Mac, it's under help contents. In the documentation, there is a section called REST. So again, it's for the server, it's section 20. For the hot folder, will be different. For central, will be different. But let's jump to the server one. Again, each product will have this REST services documented. We walk through how to use the REST services, and we talk about either using the REST authorization header. We also have a REST session secret header. You can use either one. I've always used the REST authorization and I pass in the value based on each request. So the value with each request. So I would you could use that way, or if you really want to be secure, you can use the REST session secret header. And then if you scroll down to section 20C is where we have our REST documentation. the first link will point you straight to the documentation page. So this is where you see all the different endpoints that we support based on what you're looking to do. You can go to each one of them, and then for each endpoint, we'll tell you what methods what HTTP methods that endpoint supports. You can drill into a specific endpoint. So we'll be working with the users endpoint. So let's go ahead, drill into the users, and then you have all the different endpoints. So you have the delete, get, post, and then etc. and so on. As I mentioned, the files and libraries tab at the top will allow you to sort of export, gives you access to all the different client libraries that are generated by the system based on the language you're working with. So you can feel free to download the one that suits you. So let's go back here. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. So the first one is we're going to look at getting a list of nodes in Central. So let's actually go to our Central, and right now our Central has under nodes, we have only one node, which is our central node. So I may not cover all the steps of some of the things I'm going to show because I'm assuming that some of you guys have worked with the product. But if there's something I've skipped over that you're not quite sure about, by all means, just put it in the questions, and I'll explain how we got that to that place. So let me put my central IP here. Let me identify myself as that IP. Let's go in FC server, hit apply. So now I've connected my FileCatalyst server to Central. So let's give it a second. So the server is connecting in. There we go. Server is connected to Central, and I can see my node show up in Central over here. So let's go and figure out how to get that endpoint for the node list. So again, Central documentation. Let's go down to our REST API. Let's look at our REST endpoints here, and I have what's called a nodes resource. The naming convention for our endpoints, for the most part, will match what the nodes are called up here. Also, what the different items are called up here. So there's a good a one-to-one mapping between the node name, between the endpoint name and the actual entity you're looking to query on. All right, let's see. This is this is the one we want. So this is a nodes resource. So we want to get a list of nodes. So we'll see that the rs get nodes is going to return all the central nodes, and it's a get. So let's launch Postman. All right, so let me just close this stuff, and let's go new request. Actually, let's just a new tab is fine. Let me close some of the stuff here. Save. That's fine. Don't save. Don't save. Okay, so it's a get. So the endpoint is going to be the URL to Central plus the endpoint location we want to go to. So let's copy that, go back to Postman and specify that, and then we want to copy the endpoint name. So copy. Okay, so now we have our URL defined. Now let's go and generate our headers so that so we can get authenticated. In Postman, opposed to googling online and finding how to base64. In Postman, if you just go to basic auth and specify your username and password, it will create your REST authorization header, but it will call it authorization. So what you do at that point, I just go back to no auth. This doesn't get removed, which is great. And I update this to REST because this is the name of our header. And then all you got to do is remove this basic because we don't need it. Then we specify our accept, so that we're basically then telling the server we're accepting back JSON. This is XML. Now I can hit send. All right, so it's telling me that it can identify because I have one too many slashes here. So let's hit send. Boom. So now I get back all the data. I get back all the nodes. I get back the status, host name, IP, all the supported links. So if there's different events I want to run to different endpoints I want to call on the specific node, I have each each configs each of the entities URL as well as the identification of that URL. So here we'll have the users. So if I want to get the list of users, I can copy this, and is it duplicate here? No, let's just go back here, remove this quote. Now I can go ahead and add in my headers again. Actually, I can just copy it. Copy headers, rest authorization, put in a value, accept, put in a value, hit send. Now I'll get back the list of users on the server. So you can see that I have the anonymous user, I have the standard user called user, which matches my FileCatalyst server user list over here. And the same way I can go and add users and so on through Central. So let's go back here. So we've done the first one. So now we talked about getting a list of users in the FileCatalyst server. So notice I made the same call to Central, but let's go and run that same call to the FileCatalyst server. So if we're making calls to the FileCatalyst server, you'll need to make sure your HTTP is enabled and you have your endpoint. So again, if we go back to the FileCatalyst server's documentation here, we have the user's endpoint, which is at the bottom, and it's much like the one to Central, but we're opposed to running the node ID, we're just basically making a call straight to rs/users. So opposed to going to Central, let's make another call here. So let's copy the URL from the FileCatalyst server. Let's copy that, go back there, specify that rs/users, and again we need to specify the REST authorization header, update request, no auth, and we got to remove the basic, then accept application.json, send. I get back the same user list. So this is how you get the list of users. All right, let's go back to thing. Add user to a server. This is the fun part. So when adding user to a server, again, refer to documentation. So just close this out here. So to add a user, we're going to run a post and send in a user, basically user object in JSON format. So to generate this user object, you can either copy the one that's here, but what I like to do is I like to first get a user from the server so I have an idea of what I'm getting. So over here is specify user. So I'm going to get this user object and it will give me all the JSON. What I do is I copy that, and then to add a user, you're basically running a post on the main user endpoint. So let's go ahead and switch this to a post. Let's go to the body. I use raw. It's easy to modify. So now we want account to be enabled. Let's call this REST user and give that REST. Let's go and update some of these properties and that. So we've changed the username and we've changed the REST user and so on. The only thing we're missing is the password. So let's go back to our documentation here and let's see. We need to add in the password to that object. So let's go here and specify the password. Remove the last comma. let's just call it, give the same password, rest user. Okay, so this is all good. The only thing we've forgotten to do is add in our content type, otherwise this call will break. Application.json/JSON. There you go. And so that looks all good. Let's do a send now. So we get back a 201 user created. This is the user that we created. If I go back to my FileCatalyst server, go to the users tab, I see my user now being created. The same call can be done through Central. So let's go and copy this. Let's go back to our Central here. So let's go ahead and change this to post. Give it a content type, application.json. Go to the body, switch that. So opposed to doing that, let's call it Central or REST Central user. So again, give the same password all, as well as update that and update that. If you want to ever change the permissions, you can change some of the permissions here. Let's say if the user didn't have access to delete any folders, you can choose false. No modify permissions, choose false. No read, choose false. No rename, false. Let's go and set all the directory permissions to false. Now we can go ahead and add this user to the server, but through Central. So notice we have the nodes, and we're identifying the node by the node ID, and then we're also calling the user's endpoint here. So let's go send. Again, we get a 201 created. The status codes are important. It'll tell you, if it's successful or not. 201 is good. 400, 500, not so good. You can identify why it didn't work. But now let's go back to my server. You can see my REST Central user is created. If I edit this user, go to user permissions, I can see all the file permissions are enabled, all the folder permissions are not enabled. So this is how we can create a user through Central. Cool. So we've done that one. Okay, executing a task on the hot folder. So let's say you've defined a task on the hot folder, and through this hot folder, you don't want it to, run all the time. You only want it to run at specific times when, the content is going to be put in. So opposed to putting it on a schedule, putting the task on a schedule, we can have it as user triggered. But this means that you actually have to trigger the task for it to run. So you may not have access to this hot folder from if you're at home, if you're in a different location. So it may be hard for you to execute this task unless you, either remote desktop in or use our hot folder, admin client, etc. But what happens if you want to, integrate some of this functionality within your a third-party application, whereby you want to be able to execute this from, let's say, a web-based UI, whereby if there's going to be new content in the folder you're monitoring and you want to execute the task to have that content be transferred to the server. You can do this via REST, and let's go and take a look at this, the REST endpoints for this. So again, this hot folder is not connected to Central. We can enable it to connect to Central. So we can either do it directly on the hot folder or through Central. IP, let's call it my hot folder. Hit apply. Let's give it a second. Okay, so now in a couple of seconds it will connect. Perfect. So now let's go ahead and do this through through Postman, through through Central. Let's go back to my Central nodes. Okay, apparently my hot folder seems to be down. Oh, it's back up. Let's refresh the notes page. Yep, should be there. So let's go to back to the documentation we had for for Central, and let's go back to the resources. Let's go and find the scheduler resource here. The nodes resources. So under nodes, we're going to have the hot folder resources, and let's go look for the hot folder resources here. There we go. So this is the one we want to use. but this one is deprecated, so that means there's a revision 1. So whenever you see deprecated, look for the actual product. So in this case, it's hot folder HF. Look for either a Rev 1 or a Rev 2 based on the revisions we've done. So let's go here and look for that. So post. Okay, well, I know it's scheduler in the task ID. So let's go and do a get on the actual scheduler to get the list of all the node ID, sorry, the task IDs that we're going to be executing. So let's just copy this here. Actually, let's go back to Postman. Let's run our first call on the nodes and hit send. This will give us all the new node that's connected in. So this is a hot folder node. Yep, it's the hot folder node. And then let's go look at the endpoints that we've exposed to this. Okay, so we want the tasks. So let's copy this one. Let's create a new tab. It's a get. Let's go and set update request. Set back to no headers. Let's go call that rest. Delete that. Accept application JSON. And then let's hit send. This should give me back all the tasks that are defined in my hot folder. And there we go. So this is the task. It's called, let's see where the name of the task is. Uploads to server, which matches my hot folder here. Go back to scheduler, uploads to server. Now we want to execute this task. So to execute the task, let's go back to the documentation. So let's look at the documentation of the hot folder here. Again, scroll down to the REST documentation. Click here. We want to go to the scheduler resources and hit scheduler. So we have two. We have the get resource, returns the scheduler found in the system. We have the post, updates the scheduler. And then we have the get on a task and the post on a task. So the post on a task allows you to specify the action we want to do. So if we pass in the post with action equals execute, this will execute the task. So let's go and so now we do a get on this task ID, and we'll get back task details of the various tasks in the in the hot folder. We have our task ID is set to this. So now what we want to do is we want to do a post to the same endpoint and append action equals execute. And once we do this, we have two question marks here. Action equal execute. We can hit send. We'll get back a 204. And then if we look at our hot folder, we can see the task being executed and the transfer happening. So this is how you can perform this is how you can perform a call through central to the hot folder to execute a remote task to either upload files or download files. And that entirely depends on the task definitions and how you set up that task within your hot folder. All right, the last one, get remote file listings on transfer agent. So again, with the transfer agent, let's go and connect our transfer agent to central. So I'll launch up my transfer agent. Once my transfer agent launches, we can go into the configuration page of transfer agent. We can then look at central, give it connected to my central. transfer agent, that's all good. And enable that. Okay. You get a warning saying that now your transfer agent can be controlled by True Central, just to alert you that someone else can um, initiate file transfers other than you. So if we go back to my central here, I can see my transfer agent connected. And let's go back to Postman and let's build another call that talks to my transfer agent. So let's get the nodes again. Let's scroll down and see if our transfer agent, so you can see TA agent is available. So let's go and get the files. So this is agent. So the endpoint for the files is, for example, TA local will give you the local file system. TA remote will give you the files, the file listing on the server. Let's do local instead of remote because remote requires us to connect in and so on. So let's just skip that and jump straight to this here. So again, give it my authorization. Update. Okay, accept application JSON and hit send. Now you can see I got my desktop, my documents, downloads folder, home, and so on and so forth. So I can see my entire file listing based on that. If I want to go into the desktop, I can just put /users/ Elton Carneiro / desktop. Now I can see all the files within my desktop. Cycle bin, my 1.m4v, 2.m4v, and so on. So you can basically browse the user's file system through Central using the transfer agent REST calls. Cool. So let's go back here. So we've connected the REST. If you guys have any questions, do let me know. I can answer them towards the end of the webinar if it's any REST related stuff. The next one is the Java API. So the Java API is really simple to use. It's our client API. Again, use any Java IDE you wish. I use Eclipse. I like Eclipse, but if you're an IntelliJ fan or a NetBeans fan, feel free to use whichever one you wish to use. Within the IDE, create a new project, or if you have an existing project, feel free to use that. Make sure you import the fc_api.jar. This is again available on our download page. Create Java classes, or again, link to the FC client object from your own classes if you have classes already does file transfer within it. Specify the IP, port, username, and password of the server you want to connect to. Specify the file or folder you wish to upload or download. Compile and run. Really simple. We do have an in-depth Java API webinar that talks about how building a UI, how you can connect your file transfer to UIs, you can click on the button and so on. I won't be going to any of that today, but feel free to take a look at it if you wish to see more about the Java API specifically. It's on our website under our webinars page. There's some links to it over here. We also have the similar webinar for our C++ client API. What I'll be showing today is just very simple. Create a project, pick one of our sample classes, change the configs, specify, upload the file, and so on. We will cover the FileCatalyst Server API as well. We'll talk about creating a user. So we'll use the FileCatalyst Java API to create the user account, and at the end, we'll delete the user account. So let's get started. Eclipse. Let's go ahead and create a new project here. Let's call it FileCatalyst API webinar. Java 8 is recommended for the current version of FileCatalyst. Let's go next. Again, you don't have to worry about changing all this stuff. You can click next, so just hit finish. So now I have a project. Now let's go and add in our FC API lib file. Personally, I like to put my libs in a lib folder of the project root. So let me go ahead and make a folder here called lib, finish. Should show up. Okay, now let's go ahead and download our FileCatalyst API jar files. For this project, since we're going to be interacting with both the server API and the client API, we only need to bring in the server API jar file as it includes the client API. If you're working on a project where you're looking to integrate just the client APIs, you only need the FC API.jar, which is a client API that you can get from our download page. But if you're looking to work with both, we need the FileCatalyst Server API. I already have this downloaded. It's in my downloads folder here. So let's go ahead and drop it into my lib. I'm going to hit copy here. Now I have the FC API in my lib folder. Next step is to go and add it to the build path so that we now can reference it in our code. All right, now let's go ahead and make a new package. We're going to call this package com.filecatalyst.api webinar. And that's going to be a new package that we're going to be using. Now let's go ahead and create a new class within this package. We're going to call this class create user and upload file class. So hit finish. The class gets generated. And now we have a class that we can start adding code to simulate an upload or a download. So the easiest way to get up and running is to use some of our sample code that we provide on our website. Let me just go ahead and open a new window here, and let's go to our download page where the Java docs are. So let's go to download.filecatalyst.com. Click on SDK, and here's the different APIs we'll be using. If you get the server API, that's where you can get the FC server.jar. What we're interested in is creating a user. So let's look at the Java docs for this. The FileCatalyst Server Java docs under the main class is the FC server class. And right at the top, you'll see some code which shows you an example how to create a user on the FileCatalyst server itself. So let's go ahead and copy some of this code here. That's all the code we need. Let's go back to our Eclipse. So under here, let's go add some lines, paste it, and we'll get a whole bunch of errors, which is fine. These errors are mostly because the imports are not done. So let's go ahead and import. You can either do this, or you could right-click, the easier way, right-click, you go to source, organize imports, and that should add in all the imports for you, automatically. Now we'll notice that this reference is giving us an error, and the reason for that is FileCatalyst Server has been defined over here, and we're trying to access it in a different method. So let's go ahead and refactor this and create a local, basically a field in this class. So let's call it FC Server, and boom, we move this up to the top. However, it's still being initialized in the init method. We could make a constructor and have it initialized to the constructor, but I think so this is fine for this demo. So now our classes has no errors. So we have we have a couple of methods here. We have the initialize method. We'll make a connection to our FileCatalyst server, and we have a reconnect. Again, we just check if it's disconnected. If it's disconnected, we connect. And we have a method that goes ahead and creates a user with the username and password that you specify. If the user, what this code first does is checks if the user doesn't exist, we'll then go ahead and create it. If it does exist, we'll just do a mod on it. So the next part of the code that we want to do is we have the user creation code. Now we need the upload code. So let's go ahead and create a new method here called for upload, public void upload file. And now, since we're creating the user account outside of this method, we'll need to pass it in. So let's call this string user, string password. Again, this is one way of doing it. You could have this as field variables in your class, where you can initialize them to your constructor, so on and so forth. Let's look at some sample code on the upload file part. So again, back to the download page. If we just go back to our main download page for the SDK, there's some client API. We can use the Java docs from here, even though this library has been embedded in the server API. It's the same Java docs. Click on Unlimited FC Client API and look at the FC Client object. And again, right at the top, we have a little simple example of how you can, upload a file, as well as we have a download example. This demo and webinar is going to focus on just uploading. So let's copy this and let's go in back to our Eclipse and let's paste this code in here. Again, you're going to have reference issues, so let's go ahead and fix the references. So again, you can hover over each one or right click, choose source, and organize imports. Since there are only 3, I think so we can do this fairly quickly. Now, we're still seeing some compile errors, and this is because some of the methods in the FC client object throw exceptions, and so we either need to catch them or rethrow them. So why don't we just add a throws declaration, which should take care of in any exceptions that this method will throw. Since we need to log in, we need to specify the user and password, as opposed to hard coding it. Let's use the ones that we're passing into this method. Okay, and also we'll need to specify the FileCatalyst server we want to connect to. So again, this can, opposed to hard coding it, you can pass in as a variable, initialize it to your constructor. For our case here, we're just gonna hard code it 7.0.0.1. Now, the default port on FileCatalyst server is 21. The default port on this constructor is 21. If you're running a different port, just pass it in, comma. This constructor can be overloaded to pass in the IP and the port you want to connect to. And now we have that going. Let's make sure we have the file to upload. So to upload the file, let's specify the path. My files are located in Elton Carneiro / desktop / demo file / let's go and find a file within that folder. Open up. Okay, let's go to demo files. I have a file.2.dmg within this location. File2.dmg. That's what we're going to upload. Now, this while loop basically will check if the transfer is complete. For redundancy purposes and to make sure that it's opposed to it erroring out or failing out, or if there's any issues happening, the final status of a transfer is always complete. If there's an error, if it was really successful, or if it was canceled, it'll still be complete. So if you want to trap error or canceled, you can use the is transfer error or is transfer canceled methods within the transfer hook to do additional checks at the bottom here. So if there's an error or if it's canceled, you can print out an error and address it accordingly. So this while loop will keep printing out the transfer. There's a sleep of 1 second, so you have a 1 second interval of the transfer until the transfer is complete, and then it will the execution will continue. So we have this method to upload files. Now, how do we tie this all together? So let's go ahead and create a main method. So if you're building a nice little jar file, you can use your arguments to pass those values in, but we're going to be hard coding some of this stuff. So instantiate a new object, create user and upload. Let's call it cup equals new create user and upload file. So the first thing we need to do is instantiate the FC server object. So let's call cup.init. Now cup.init is going to show us that we're connecting to the local host over port 12400. The remote admin and username and password is admin system. This is what's defined under your FileCatalyst server under administration. So these are the accounts you need to use, and these are the settings you need to use to connect to the remote admin using the server API. Then we're going to connect. Now let's go back, and again, this is going to throw an error. So we'll address these errors in a few seconds. So after you initialize it, we want to create the user. So before we do that, let's define a couple of variables here. Username equals, let's call this API, string password for simplicity's sakes, same password as the user. Let's go ahead and call cup create or modify user, and we want to use our username, and then we want to use our password that we defined. Now we have this created. We can, for sanity purposes, once you do add the user, since we're already checking if the user exists, we don't have to do an additional check. We can just skip that additional check to make sure that the user was actually created. Otherwise, you can move that code somewhere else to do a check, at a different spot if you wish. Now we're going to call upload files, and I'm going to pass in the same username and the same password that we defined above. So once we're done, we want to delete this user. So we don't have a method to delete the users yet. So let's go ahead and create a method to delete the user. Public void delete user, string user. And again, we can do a quick, we can either, if you want, we always, suggest, make sure that, your code is always, sanitized in that sense, to make sure before you call FC server, you want to check if it's null. So if it hasn't been instantiated, you're not getting any null pointer exceptions, meaning that if someone calls delete user before calling init, you would get a null pointer exception. So here we can say if FC server is not equal to null. And again, same thing with the user. If the user being passed in is null and empty string, you want to throw an error. Again, these additional checks that you can do. So if FC server is not equal to null, we want to do FC server dot delete user, or it's del user, and then pass in the user. And this will throw an exception. So let's do add throws and throw an exception, which we can then call here cup dot delete user, pass in the username, and that should be it. So all these methods within the APIs and so on are all documented on our SDK page. You can take a look and see various different methods. So this is the client. We have all the methods defined here. And on our server API page, it's much the same. Let's just open up it in a new tab. Server, all the documentation is available. So the one we're working with right now is the delete user. So it's called del user. And you also have the option to delete the user's home directory, meaning that you can clean up all the files in the user's home directory. So that's another method we could use. So we have all our code ready. Let's go ahead and surround this within a try and catch, because we want to try and catch these exceptions. Now opposed to just doing individually, let's go and catch them all in a single big catch. So some simple formatting here so it doesn't read too badly. Source format. There we go. Looks a lot cleaner now. So now if I look at my FileCatalyst server and the users, I don't have a REST API, an API user defined. So let's go ahead and execute this and see what we get. So what we want to do, execute as a Java application. And now you can see it connecting in to the remote admin server. And let's see what happens. API user has been created. Look at the system monitor. We now have a file coming in from the user API. You can see it's 100%. And now we've deleted the user. And that's it. So simple. Create a user, perform an upload, delete the user. Make sure the FileCatalyst server is all clean. Don't We see a little exception here, and it's just saying that a class is not found. By all means, do let us know if you see some of these exceptions. We can address them, but they shouldn't usually cause you any problems. So that's all great, and that's it for the API demo. So now we see a transfer happening. We saw the transfer go on the FileCatalyst server. Now we can do some fancier stuff. So let's say while the transfer is happening, we want to limit the rate. One thing to note is that if you don't specify a start rate or target rate, FileCatalyst will assume the defaults, which means the default is that the start rate is 0 and the target rate is whatever your FileCatalyst license is set to. Now, you can limit this if you wish to. You can change them. In my experience, not setting the start rate, so having it to use a default of 0, causes the client to auto detect the best mode of transfer. So if you know your start rate, or if you don't wish to auto detect, you could set fc.set start rate to something small. Let's say 1,000, and again set a target rate. Set target rate to 10,000. So this will means that we'll start at 1,000 kilobits per second and we'll ramp up to 10 megabits, so 10,000 kilobits per second. However, let's say within our while loop, within our transfer, we know some other activities coming in. So this is when you're dealing with multiple transfers and so on. You have external code that's defining how fast this transfer should go. At any point in time, as a transfer is happening, you can add code like if transfer dot, I'm showing this as an example, you don't have to use a specific one. Get percent is greater than 30 and transfer.get percent is less than, let's say, 35. We now want to set the target rate to, let's say, 5 megabits per second. But now, if we leave it as is, the only problem with this code is that as soon as it hits 36%, your target rate's not going to go up. So let's go ahead and add an else statement. Else fc.set target rate is back to 10,000. Right? So now, if we execute this code, run the Java application. Let's go back to my FileCatalyst server here. The user will get created. Takes a few seconds for the API to get all the configs of the servers and so on. So, by all means, this is fairly normal. So you can see the API. You can see the transfer going, and you can see it's at 10 megabits per second. 10 megabits per second. As soon as this hits 30%, we should see it drop to 5 megabits per second. There, boom, it dropped to 5 megabits per second. And as soon as it hits 35, it ramps back up. So if you look at the graph, you can see the transfer hit. You see a little dip here for a few seconds, and it's back up. So we can actually see this big spike is causing us not to see that well. That's fine, you can get the idea. And the transfer will complete at 10 megabits per second. And you can then go ahead and complete the transfer, and it will delete that user account from the system. So the other thing I want to quickly go over some stuff here is our API folder here. So in our API folder that you download from the website, we have some sample code. Again, this is a sample code on a number of different use cases. lot of different sample examples here for uploading a file. The code I based my demo off was upload file, upload sample.java. We do have upload sample advanced. We have upload job, which talks to FileCatalyst workflow, and a couple of other examples. If you're familiar with our FileCatalyst link feature within the FileCatalyst server, which allows to send the file to an email address, we also have an API example that shows you how to use that from within a Java application. So feel free to use any one of them. That's our API, and so our Java API and server and client API. The last part of the webinar is the JavaScript API. So this is basically a wrapper around the transfer agent. So what I have is, let's close up. Let's go back here. So what we have is a page. So this API is available on the FileCatalyst server. If you look in the install path of the FileCatalyst server, so let me just go into that's not it. The second one, this one here. If you look into the install path of your FileCatalyst server, on a Mac it's under contents Java www, but on Windows it will be under www. If you look under TA, we have a transfer agent sample, transfer agent API sample, and then we also have a transfer agent API sample HTML page. If you open this up in a browser, you'll see a page like this. If you want to play with the JavaScript API, you can take a look at all the functions we expose in the JS file. But one easy way to actually interact with this is, let me actually shut this down, shut down the transfer agent so I can show you a simple way to invoke it. Through the browser, again, you may have to enable this. It's a developer mode. You have the console. You can do ta. Let's say launch, right? So ta.launch is a function. If you call it, it will launch a transfer agent. So if we call ta.launch, you'll see that, do you want this page to open up the FileCatalyst transfer agent? If you don't have the transfer agent installed, it will prompt you to download and install it in the whole process. If I hit allow, the transfer agent will automatically launch. You can see it launching over here. It's available. And then once it's launched, you can now get access to the different events at the API. So one thing is, let's say, getting the file listing of the local site. Once it's launched, you can do ta.files.local. This is a function, so if you hit enter, you get the function itself, and you can see what you need to pass in. I'm not going to pass in anything because I don't just want the defaults. So ta files local. If I call that, again, now I can see my JSON of all the files returned. You can do whatever you want with this. You can build your own UIs, etc. But this is our JavaScript API. Cool. I think this is the last part of the this webinar on APIs. This is a sample JS file for the transfer agent API with a lot of different functions. You can connect, you can perform an upload, so on and so forth. So feel free to take a look at it if it's something that interests you. Otherwise, at this point, I'll take a few questions. I know we've slightly gone over, but if you guys have any questions, if you want to see something different, please by all means put in a question into the question box, and I'll answer it. Do you need to have a license to use the API? You don't need to have a license to basically integrate and use the API. The only thing you need is a license on the FileCatalyst server. The license of the FileCatalyst server needs to have the API components enabled for the APIs to work. But in terms of integrating, if you're building up a platform that uses our APIs, you don't need a license for that. So feel free to pick it up and use it. In terms of the licensing, we have different licenses. Again, I think so. My last webinar I did on cloud services and a different cloud offering, we have talked about some of the licensing options. We do have a perpetual licensing. We do have consumption-based licensing per hour on Amazon and Azure, and we have our per gigabyte pricing. When it comes to the per hour or the per gigabyte pricing, our APIs are included as part of the licensing. So feel free to, if you have a license that is either per gigabyte or per hour on Amazon or Azure, the APIs support does come with it. But saying thank you very much for joining me. I know it was a bit of a longer webinar, but I hope the stuff I showed you was useful to you. And if you have any questions looking at integrating in specific ways, by all means, feel free to reach out to me or reach out to our support team, and we'll be able to help you guys out. Cool. Thank you very much.